There are flavors that tell a story, and then there are flavors that are the story. The first time I ate her food, it was a story of the sea. A pan-seared scallop dish so perfectly executed it tasted of salt spray and deep, cold water. The searing was an aggressive, confident prologue. The saffron risotto beneath, a patient, nuanced narrative. In a world of culinary shortcuts and Instagram-friendly aesthetics, she was a purist, a storyteller. A food blogger with a modest but fiercely loyal following, recognized her as a rare artist. The restaurant was a high-end, glass and steel establishment called Aperture, but she was its soul. I became a regular, always requesting a seat with a view of the kitchen pass. I watched her command the line, a silent general presiding over a controlled chaos. Her movements were economical, her face a mask of concentration, dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to sharpen her features. She was tall, with a kind of coiled stillness, and when she spoke to her team, it was in a low, clipped tone that carried more weight than a shout. We exchanged a few brief words over the months. I'd compliment a specific component, the unexpected hint of fennel in a sauce, the delicate crisp of a potato confit, and her eyes would light up with a flicker of pure, unadulterated passion. It was the only crack in her professional armor. Then one Thursday evening the story changed. The scallop dish arrived, and the prologue rang hollow. The sear was hesitant, the risotto underneath bland, lacking its usual complex hum. It was technically flawless but utterly soulless, like a cover song performed without understanding the lyrics. I knew instantly she wasn't in the kitchen. The floor manager, a man with a practiced, empty smile, confirmed it. "The chef is no longer with us," he said, his tone suggesting a tidy, amicable departure. But I knew her work. Tidy and amicable were not in her culinary vocabulary. Her food was about conviction. People with that much conviction don't just walk away. The truth, when I found it through a few discreet inquiries with industry contacts, was far more brutal. She had been fired. The official story whispered through the city's restaurant scene was one of betrayal, kickbacks from suppliers, theft of premium ingredients, a rot of corruption hidden beneath a veneer of artistry. She was not just gone. She was being systematically erased, her reputation dismantled with cold, vicious efficiency. The industry had blacklisted her. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I had tasted her integrity on a plate. The woman who would replate a dish because a single microgreen was misplaced would never, ever compromise on her ingredients. Someone had set her up, and I, a mere chronicler of her work, felt an inexplicable duty to find the real story. Finding her was like trying to track down a ghost. Her name had vanished from Aperture's website, her professional social media accounts were deleted, and mutual acquaintances in the culinary world suddenly had their mouths clamped shut, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. It took me the better part of 2 weeks, calling in favors and chasing down a lead from a disgruntled former pastry chef to get an address. It was for an apartment building in a part of the city that the guidebooks ignored, a place of crumbling brick and rusted fire escapes. The hallway smelled of damp concrete and stale cooking oil. I stood before her door, number 4B, its painted numbers peeling away. I knocked, the sound echoing flatly down the corridor. I waited. I knocked again, louder this time. After a long moment, I heard the slide of a deadbolt. The door opened a crack, and an eye peered out, clouded with suspicion. Then the door opened fully. The woman standing before me was a hollowed-out shell of the chef I'd known. The sharp, commanding posture was gone, replaced by a defeated slump that made her t-shirt hang from her bony shoulders. Her dark hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes, once so fiercely focused, were bloodshot and vacant. She was thinner, fragile-looking, as if she might break apart with a sudden movement. The air that seeped from her apartment was stale and sour. She stared at me, her expression a cocktail of confusion and raw defensiveness. She recognized me. I could see it in the slight widening of her eyes, but she didn't understand. In her world, I was a critic, a journalist, a spectator. My presence here could only mean one thing. I was here for the morbid follow-up, the story of the fallen star. She took a step back, a flinch of self-preservation. "What do you want?" Her voice was a dry rasp. I had rehearsed a speech in the car, something about believing in her, about wanting to help. But the words felt hollow now, staring into the yawning abyss of her despair. Behind her, I could see a landscape of neglect, takeout containers stacked on a coffee table, clothes piled on a chair, a fine layer of dust coating every surface. Words were useless here. Action was the only language that might cut through. I met her gaze, held it, and then stepped past her into the apartment. I put down my bag, found a trash bag under the sink, and without a word, began to gather the discarded containers. The silence in the room was a living thing. It was thick with her unspoken questions and my unoffered explanations. She stood by the door, arms crossed, watching my every move. She was a cornered animal, wary and waiting for the trap to spring. I ignored her gaze, focusing on the simple, methodical task at hand. I cleared the coffee table, wiped it down with a damp paper towel. I gathered the clothes and piled them into a laundry basket I found in the corner. I opened a window, letting in the gray afternoon light and a breath of cool, city air that, for all its exhaust fumes, felt cleaner than what was trapped inside. I worked my way to the kitchen. It was the beating heart of the wreckage. Dirty dishes were piled high in the sink, the counters stained with ring after ring of old coffee. It was a profound desecration. This place of creation turned into a tomb. For a chef like her, a dirty kitchen wasn't just messy, it was a sign that the fire had gone out completely. I turned on the hot water and began to wash the dishes, the clatter of ceramic against the metal sink the only sound in the apartment. When the kitchen was clean, or at least clean enough, I opened her refrigerator. It was nearly empty. A carton of eggs, a withered scallion, a half-empty jar of tomato sauce, and a plastic-wrapped block of indeterminate cheese. On the counter sat a box of spaghetti. It was enough. My own cooking skills were decidedly pedestrian, honed by online recipes and a love of eating, not creating. To cook in her kitchen, for her, felt like a profound act of hubris. My hands felt clumsy as I chopped the scallion, the knife strokes uneven and unsteady. I boiled the water, whisked the eggs, and heated the sauce. The smell of garlic and tomato began to fill the small apartment, a domestic, comforting scent that felt alien in this space of stagnation. I burned the eggs, slightly. The noodles were a minute past al dente. It was a deeply flawed, mediocre meal. I drained the noodles, mixed everything in a bowl, and placed it on the now-clean coffee table. I didn't say, eat. I didn't say anything. I just sat on the floor, a careful distance away, and waited. She moved slowly, as if her limbs were weighted down with lead. She sank onto the couch and stared at the bowl. It was an insult to her craft, this simple, imperfect offering. But it was also something else. It was food made for her, with no expectation of payment, no review, no critique. It was just food. She picked up the fork, twirled a small amount of spaghetti, and brought it to her lips. She chewed once, twice. A tear traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. Then another.
She didn't sob.
She just ate, the silent tears streaming down her face, a quiet, heartbreaking surrender. The noodles were a key, turning a lock I hadn't even known existed. She didn't suddenly pour her heart out, but the rigid, defensive shell around her began to soften. Over the next few days, I established a quiet routine. I would arrive in the morning with coffee and groceries, and in the evening, I would cook something simple. We rarely spoke during these meals, but the silence was different now. It was less a wall and more a space, a place for her to simply be, without the pressure to perform or explain. The story came out in fragments, shards of a shattered career. She told me about the vice chef, a man with a charming smile and ambition that had long curdled into bitter resentment. He had coveted her position from the day she was promoted over him. She spoke of the purchasing manager, a man who saw the restaurant's pantry as his personal bank account. They had been running a kickback scheme for months, approving invoices for premium ingredients that never arrived, swapping them for cheaper substitutes, and pocketing the difference. She had discovered it by accident. A delivery of truffles that smelled faintly of chemical wash instead of rich, earthy depth. An order of olive oil that was too light, too thin, lacking the grassy bite she'd specified. She was a fanatic about sourcing, and she knew her suppliers and their products down to the smallest detail. She started digging. When she confronted them with her findings, she had intended to report it all to the restaurant's owners. She never got the chance. "They were faster," she said one evening, staring into a bowl of soup. Her voice was flat, stripped of all emotion. "They used my own standards against me. They had fabricated a new set of invoices, ones that showed her authorizing the fraudulent purchases. They created a false paper trail that made it look like the kickbacks were going to a bank account in her name, and even planted a cache of high-value truffles in her personal locker to seal the lie. The vice chef, who had always complimented her meticulous nature, used it to paint her as a cunning, detail-oriented thief. The owners, more concerned with their brand reputation than the truth, had fired her on the spot, with a threat of legal action if she ever spoke of it. They needed a scapegoat, and she was the perfect one. Listening to her, I understood the depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just about the job or the money. They had weaponized her passion, turning her greatest strength, her unwavering integrity, into the instrument of her ruin. The industry she had dedicated her life to, had sacrificed nights and weekends and relationships for, had not just discarded her. It had branded her a pariah based on the lies of two corrupt men. I didn't offer platitudes or empty promises. I just listened, bearing witness to the injustice. And in that quiet, shared space, a cold, clear resolve began to form within me. They had tried to bury her story. I was going to dig it back up. My blog, which had always been a platform for celebrating culinary art, became my covert, unassuming weapon. I had a network, a web of contacts stretching from line cooks to sommeliers to food distributors. I began to pull on those threads, not as a blogger sniffing out a scoop, but as a concerned colleague. My inquiries were cloaked in casual conversation. Heard things went down at Aperture. I'd say to a chef at a new opening, "Wild, right?" Or to a supplier, "You guys still working with Aperture?" Heard their new vice chef is shaking things up. The nights became a blur of quiet, relentless work. With her asleep in the other room, I'd sit at her small kitchen table, my laptop casting a pale glow on my face. I cross-referenced the names she'd given me with public records. I scrolled through years of online restaurant forums, searching for whispers of similar schemes. The vice chef's name popped up in a complaint from a former prep cook at his previous job, a mention of being pressured to sign off on deliveries he hadn't fully inspected. It was a small crack, but it was a start. I arranged to meet the disgruntled pastry chef who'd given me her address. We met in a dimly lit coffee shop far from the downtown restaurant scene, a place where industry gossip rarely traveled. He told me how the purchasing manager always insisted on using a specific, obscure meat supplier, even when their quality was inconsistent and their prices inflated. He'd overheard screaming arguments between her and the manager about it, months before she was fired. It was another piece of the puzzle. The biggest, most explosive break came from a source I never could have anticipated. A young hostess from Aperture, who followed my blog, reached out anonymously. She had always admired the chef and felt sick about what had happened. She told me the purchasing manager and the vice chef often had hushed late-night meetings after the restaurant closed, and that the night before the chef was fired, she'd seen them shredding a box full of documents in the back office. I started a new file on my computer, protected by a complex password. It held a meticulous timeline of events, a list of names and contacts, a collection of screenshots, and detailed summaries of every conversation. I recorded a phone call with a contact at a food distribution company who confirmed the purchasing manager had a long-standing reputation for being flexible with invoices in exchange for personal kickbacks. Each piece of information was a small stone, but I was building a foundation, a case built in the shadows while I spent my days helping her remember how to live in the light. I had underestimated the depth of her trauma. I thought that by clearing her name, I was offering a cure. I didn't realize that the wound was so deep, it had infected her ability to trust anyone, including me. She found the file. I had left my laptop open on the kitchen table, stepping out for a moment to take a call from our lawyer contact. When I came back in, she was standing over it, her body rigid, her face ashen. The screen displayed my color-coded spreadsheet detailing names, dates, and glaring discrepancies in supplier invoices. Next to it was the audio file of my conversation with the distributor. Her eyes lifted from the screen to meet mine, and they were filled with an icy, profound betrayal. The fragile warmth we had built over weeks of shared meals and quiet companionship evaporated in an instant. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I'm gathering evidence. To help you." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "To help me? Or to help your blog? Is this my redemption arc? The big comeback story you get to break?" She gestured at the laptop, her hand clenched tight with white-hot rage. "How much traffic do you think you'll get from this? The exclusive story of the disgraced chef, vindicated by the intrepid blogger who saved her. It's perfect." Every word was a perfectly calibrated dart, striking right at the heart of my intentions. She saw my actions not as an act of friendship, but as the ultimate act of exploitation. She believed I had seen her at her lowest and, instead of offering a hand, had started taking notes for the story. The pain of her initial betrayal by her colleagues had created a blueprint for this moment. In her mind, I was just the next person to use her for personal gain. "That's not what this is," I said, my own voice strained. I haven't written a word about you. I wouldn't. You haven't yet, she countered, her eyes flashing. This is all just content, isn't it? My entire life, my career, ruined, and it's just content for you. The chasm between us felt impossibly wide. Arguing would be useless. My words were just noise against the siren of her past trauma. There was only one way to prove she was wrong. I walked to the laptop. Her body tensed, as if she expected me to slam it shut and hide my work. Instead, I moved the cursor over the folder on the desktop, the one labeled Aperture Case. It contained everything: weeks of research, recordings, contacts, my entire secret investigation. Tell me to delete it, I said, my voice low and steady. If you believe this is for me and not for you, just say the word and it's all gone. Right now. I looked at her, my hand resting on the trackpad. I will erase every last bit of it, and I will walk out that door and never bother you again. The choice is yours. The air in the room was stretched thin, humming with the unspoken weight of my offer. She stared at me, her gaze searching my face for any hint of a bluff, any flicker of deception. She saw none. My finger hovered over the trackpad, ready. The file represented her only chance at exoneration, yet I was willing to sacrifice it to salvage the fragile trust between us. That was the proof. It wasn't about the story. It was about her. Slowly, the rigid anger in her posture began to dissolve, replaced by a wave of exhausted confusion. She sank into a kitchen chair, burying her face in her hands. The silence that followed was not one of anger, but of a painful recalibration. She was reevaluating everything she thought she knew about me, about my presence in her life. When she finally looked up, the ice in her eyes had melted, leaving behind a raw, heartbreaking vulnerability. Why? She whispered. Because your talent shouldn't be buried under someone else's lies, I said simply. And because no one should have to go through that alone. That was the turning point. From that moment on, the investigation was no longer my secret project. It became our strategy. We spent the evenings at the kitchen table, not with me cooking for her, but with us poring over the evidence together. She filled in the gaps, her intimate knowledge of the kitchen's operations and the personalities involved bringing my research to life. She remembered specific dates, conversations, tiny details that transformed scattered suspicion into irrefutable certainty. A new dynamic settled between us. We were no longer a savior and a victim. We were partners. But before we could face her accusers, she needed to reclaim a part of herself she had lost. One afternoon, she pulled out a worn leather knife roll I hadn't seen before and spread it on the counter. Inside was a set of gleaming, perfectly maintained chef's knives, each one polished to a shine. She picked up the largest one, its blade catching the light. She held it for a long moment, not as a tool, but as a long-lost extension of herself. "Show me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Show me how you chop an onion." I did, my technique clumsy and inefficient. She watched, then took the knife from my hand. "No, like this." She guided my hand, showing me how to hold the blade, how to curl my fingers to protect them, how to let the weight of the knife do the work. Her touch was professional, instructive, but it was also the first time she had initiated any kind of physical contact. In that small gesture, she was no longer the patient. She was the master again. For hours, she taught me the fundamentals, knife skills, sauce making, the science of a perfect sear. It wasn't about teaching me to cook. It was about her remembering who she was. With every precise slice of the blade, she was cutting away the doubt and despair, reclaiming her own sharp edge. We requested a meeting with the owners of Aperture through a lawyer I hired, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who specialized in employment disputes. We didn't threaten a lawsuit, not yet. We simply stated that we had compiled information regarding the circumstances of her termination that the owners needed to see. They agreed, likely out of a mix of arrogance and curiosity. The meeting took place in a sterile, floor-to-ceiling glass-walled conference room that felt a universe away from her cramped apartment. The two owners sat on one side of the polished mahogany table, flanked by their corporate lawyer. They looked at us with a placid, dismissive air, me, the blogger they considered a nuisance, and her, the disgraced employee they had already written off. Our lawyer began, laying out the case in a calm, methodical tone. But the seismic power shift came when she leaned forward and took the floor. She wasn't the broken woman I had found a month ago. She was the executive chef of Aperture again, poised and articulate. She didn't speak of feelings or betrayal. She spoke of facts. She detailed the precise specifications of the olive oil she had ordered versus what was delivered. She explained the cellular structure of a scallop and how improper storage, which she had repeatedly flagged, would affect the Maillard reaction during searing. She deconstructed their lies with the same clinical precision she used to break down a side of beef. Then, I presented my part. I played the audio recording of the distributor alluding to the purchasing manager's kickback schemes. I showed them the sworn statement from the pastry chef about the repeated arguments over suppliers and the hostess's signed account of the late-night document shredding. I laid out the digital breadcrumbs I had followed, connecting the vice chef to a years-long pattern of shady dealings across 3 different restaurants. The owner's smug expression slowly curdled into alarm. Their lawyer, who had been lazily reviewing his notes, was now sitting bolt upright, frantically scribbling notes. We had them. We hadn't just proven her innocence. We had uncovered a rod in their own house that threatened to destroy their brand entirely. We didn't ask for her job back. That bridge had been incinerated the moment they chose lies over her integrity. Our demands were simple and non-negotiable. A significant financial settlement for wrongful termination and defamation, and a full public retraction of the accusations sent to every major industry publication. They were also to fire the vice chef and purchasing manager immediately, with no severance or glowing recommendations. They tried to negotiate, to bluster, to water down our demands. But we held firm. We had the truth. And for once, that was enough. They agreed to all our terms. As we walked out of the building and into the bright afternoon sun, she didn't look triumphant or vengeful. She just looked light, as if a physical weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She stopped on the sidewalk, took a deep breath of the city air, and for the first time since I'd met her, she smiled. A genuine, unburdened smile. The settlement money appeared in her bank account a week later. It was a substantial sum, enough to provide a comfortable cushion, enough to ensure she would never have to worry about rent or groceries for a long time. But it was also a ghost. It was money born from pain, a constant reminder of the career that had been stolen from her. She didn't touch it. We were in a strange limbo. The immediate battle was won, her name was cleared, but the future was a vast, terrifying blank. The thought of returning to someone else's kitchen, of putting her trust in another owner, another team, was unthinkable. The scars were too deep. One evening, we were walking through a quiet, transitional neighborhood a few miles from her apartment. It was a place of old brick warehouses being slowly colonized by art galleries and independent boutiques. We passed a small, corner restaurant space. It was empty, a for lease sign taped to the dusty window. Through the glass, I could see good bones, exposed brick, high ceilings, a generous space in the back that was clearly meant for a kitchen. We should do it, I said, the words surprising me as much as they did her. She looked at me, bewildered. Do what? This, I said, gesturing to the empty space. A restaurant. Your restaurant. No partners to answer to, no corrupt managers. Just you, your food, your rules. I would invest my life savings, combined with her settlement. We would be equal co-owners. She would run the kitchen as executive chef, and I would run the front of house and the business side. Panic flared in her eyes. It was the raw, primal fear of failure. I can't, she whispered. What if it doesn't work? What if people don't come? I was blacklisted. That label, it doesn't just wash off. I didn't argue. I knew logic wouldn't work against that kind of fear. So, I changed my tactics. The next day, I came to her apartment with a large roll of butcher paper and charcoal pencils. I unrolled the paper on her living room floor and started a sketch. Here's the pass, I said, drawing a long rectangle. And the open kitchen will be right behind it so people can see you work. We'll put the bar over here, with warm, soft lighting. Round tables here, a few booths along this wall, for privacy. I wasn't selling her a business plan. I was showing her a sanctuary. A place designed not just to serve food, but to protect her. I spent the next few nights bringing her design magazines, paint swatches, samples of reclaimed wood. I helped her visualize the space so thoroughly that it started to feel real, tangible. I was building a blueprint for a dream, hoping that if she could see it clearly enough, she would find the courage to build it with me. Signing the lease was an act of terrifying faith. The moment our pens left the paper, the dream became a concrete, unforgiving reality with monthly payments and legal obligations. The space, which had seemed so full of potential from the outside, was a cavern of dust and echoes on the inside. For the next 3 months, it became our entire world. Our days started before sunrise at the wholesale markets and ended late at night covered in a film of drywall dust and paint fumes. We were a study in contrasts. She, with her chef's precision, would spend hours meticulously planning the kitchen layout, ensuring every stainless steel surface was positioned for maximum efficiency. She debated the merits of induction versus gas cooktops with the intensity of a philosopher contemplating existence. I, on the other hand, was the whirlwind of logistics. I negotiated with contractors, navigated the labyrinth of city permits, and designed a brand identity that was clean, honest, and reflective of her food. We discovered a new rhythm, a partnership that extended beyond the moral support of the past few months. When the plumbing contractor tried to overcharge us, assuming we were two inexperienced women, I was the one who calmly produced 3 competing quotes and stared him down until he backed off. When she was paralyzed by the choice of a final menu, agonizing over every dish, I was the one who brewed her tea and acted as her first, most honest taster, reminding her to trust her instincts. There were moments of friction, born from exhaustion and stress. We argued over the color of the banquettes, the font on the menu, the brand of coffee we would serve. But the arguments never festered. We had been through a real fire together. A disagreement over upholstery felt trivial in comparison. We learned to navigate each other's anxieties, to know when to push and when to retreat. We hammered, we painted, we sanded floors until our hands were raw with splinters. We transformed the empty, echoing shell into a space that felt like us. It was warm, with dark wood, soft lighting, and an open kitchen that was clearly the heart of the room. We didn't give it a fancy, pretentious name. We called it lining, an unapologetic nod to the silver lining we had found in the wreckage of her past. Standing in the finished dining room the night before we opened, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and lemon-scented wood polish, we didn't need to say anything. We had built this together. Opening night was a controlled storm. The room was alive, buzzing with the energy of a full house. My followers had shown up in force, their curiosity piqued by my cryptic posts about a new project. Critics, drawn by the whispers of her return, occupied a few key tables, their expressions unreadable. The air hummed with anticipation. I ran the front of house, a role I had never played before but took to with a surprising calm. I greeted guests, guided servers, and kept a constant, watchful eye on the flow of the room. My true focus, however, was on the open kitchen. She was back in her element, a conductor leading a symphony of sizzles, clangs, and quiet commands. The fire was back in her eyes, brighter and hotter than ever before. This wasn't just a job, it was her resurrection. The food was magnificent. Dish after dish left the kitchen, each a perfect execution of her vision. The stories she was telling now were not just of the sea or the earth, but of resilience. There was a confidence in the flavors, a clarity that spoke of her renewed sense of purpose. Then, halfway through the dinner service, the main door swung open, and a frigid wave of air seemed to snuff out the room's warm buzz. Standing there was the city's most influential food critic. And at his side, smiling his easy, charming smile, was the vice chef from Aperture. My blood ran cold. He had orchestrated her downfall, and now he was here, in her sanctuary, on her opening night. I saw the moment she spotted him from the pass. Her hands faltered for a fraction of a second over a plate of risotto. Her back stiffened. I saw the ghost of her past trauma flicker in her eyes. It was a calculated, venomous act, designed to throw her off, to unnerve her in her moment of triumph. I moved instantly, my body acting before my mind had fully processed the threat. I intercepted them before they could take another step into the dining room. I greeted the critic with a wide, professional smile, while completely ignoring the man beside him. "So glad you could make it," I said, my voice betraying none of the fury coiling in my gut. "We have a perfect table for you right this way." I seated them at the furthest possible table from the kitchen, a spot with a notoriously bad angle for viewing the pass. For the rest of the night, I became her shield. I personally took their order, ensuring she would not have to see his face. I stood at the pass, creating a physical and emotional buffer between her and the dining room. I relayed orders, inspected plates, and offered quiet words of encouragement. My presence a steady, unwavering message. "I am here. He can't touch you." She didn't look at me, her focus locked on her craft, but I knew she felt it. She finished the service flawlessly, her hands never wavering again. The critic's review was a rave. He praised her triumphant return, her unflinching culinary voice. Lining was an overnight success. We were booked solid for a month, then 2. The initial victory felt intoxicating, a definitive vindication. But we had celebrated too soon. We had underestimated the bitterness of a man scorned. The attack began online. It started as a trickle, a few one-star reviews on Yelp and Google, all posted within the same hour. They were vague but poisonous, mentioning questionable food safety and an unclean feeling. Then the trickle became a flood. A coordinated campaign of negative reviews descended upon us, all echoing the same fabricated complaints: reheated food, unsanitary conditions, rude staff. These anonymous accounts, many created just days before, systematically dismantled our 5-star rating. Next came the Whisper campaign. A local, low-tier food blogger with a reputation for sensationalism posted a scathing expose on our restaurant, citing anonymous sources who confirmed the kitchen was a nightmare. The post was filled with lies, but it was shared dozens of times, the accusations gaining a veneer of truth with each click. Our bookings plummeted. Phones that had been ringing off the hook fell silent. We started seeing cancellations, a few at first, then a torrent. The vibrant, buzzing dining room became quiet, dotted with empty tables. I watched her spirit, so recently resurrected, begin to crumble. The digital assault was insidious, an enemy we couldn't see or fight directly. It preyed on her deepest fears, that she was permanently tainted, that the industry would never truly let her back in. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. We had only 3 tables for the entire service. After the last one left, she stood in her immaculate, silent kitchen, staring at the rows of empty chairs in the dining room. "Maybe he was right," she said, her voice hollow. "Maybe I should have just stayed gone." She started talking about cutting our losses, about closing the doors before we sank any deeper into debt. The despair I had seen in her desolate apartment was back, creeping into her eyes. The sabotage wasn't just an attack on our business, it was an attempt to drag her back into the darkness. I went to her, put my hands on her shoulders, and made her look at me. "No," I said, my voice fierce. "We are not letting him win. We built this. We are not running." Desperate situations required bold strategies. Hiding or issuing a simple press release would be like throwing a cup of water on a forest fire. We had to fight. The lies not with words, but with undeniable truth. The next morning, I posted a notice on all our social media channels. "Tonight at 5 p.m., it read, "We're opening our doors." All of them. The idea was simple, radical, and risky. We were going to host a live-streamed, completely open tour of our restaurant just before service. I would be the guide, and she would be there, silent and present. We would show them everything. Our walk-in refrigerator with its meticulously labeled and dated containers, our dry storage with invoices from our local, reputable suppliers, our gleaming prep stations. We would invite the public to be our health inspector. At 5 p.m., I went live on my phone. The viewer count climbed rapidly, hitting 6 figures midstream, far beyond anything my blog had ever reached. I started at the front door and walked them through the dining room, but the main event was the kitchen. "There have been rumors," I said, my voice steady, "so we wanted to show you the reality." I opened every drawer, every refrigerator. I showed them the fresh produce that had been delivered that morning. I held up invoices for the camera to see, every line item clear and unredacted. I walked them through our sanitation procedures, step by step. She stood by the main prep counter, her arms crossed, watching me. She didn't speak a word, but her presence was more powerful than any speech. She was the embodiment of integrity, her immaculate kitchen a reflection of her own unwavering standards. I ended the live stream by pointing the camera at her. "This is the chef," I said. Her name was dragged through the mud by people who value profit over passion. They're trying to do it again. We aren't going to let them. This restaurant was built on honesty. We have nothing to hide. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages of support flooded our accounts. Our followers, the ones who had believed in her from the beginning, became our digital army, reporting the fake reviews and defending us in the comment sections. That night, customers came in just to show their support. They didn't have reservations. They just walked in, willing to wait for a table. The dining room was full again, buzzing with a new kind of energy, not just of appreciation, but of solidarity. The smear campaign had backfired spectacularly. In their attempt to bury us in lies, they had only succeeded in revealing our truth. The victory over the smear campaign felt different from our legal win against Aperture. This time, we hadn't fought back in a sterile conference room. We had won in the court of public opinion, with our community standing behind us. The experience changed us, solidifying our purpose. Lining wasn't just a business to be protected, it was a platform. The idea came from her. One afternoon, as we were prepping for service, a young woman, a culinary school intern, was working on the line. She was talented and driven, but she was quiet, almost timid, easily shouted down by one of the more boisterous line cooks. My friend pulled the intern aside, corrected her technique with a quiet word, and then placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your voice is as important as your knife," she said. "Use it." Later that evening, she told me what was on her mind. "My story," she said, "it's not unique. How many other women have been pushed out, silenced, or had their ideas stolen in kitchens run by men? How many never get the chance to lead?" That conversation was the seed of the Silver Lining Initiative. It started small. We dedicated one night a month to hosting a free workshop for female culinary students and aspiring chefs. She would teach advanced techniques, and I would lead sessions on branding, business finance, and negotiation. We wanted to give them the tools that we had been forced to learn the hard way. The initiative grew. We started a formal mentorship program, pairing experienced female chefs from around the city with young women just starting their careers. Our restaurant became a sanctuary, a meeting place, a hub for a community that had always existed but had never had a central home. We used a portion of our profits to create a small grant fund to help women open their own food businesses. Our friendship deepened, evolving into a shared mission. The work was demanding, but it was infused with a profound sense of meaning. We were no longer just running a restaurant. We were building a table long enough for everyone to have a seat. We were taking the ugliest parts of our own story and using them to build a better, more equitable future for the women who would come after us. The Silver Lining had become a beacon. Years passed. Lining didn't just survive, it thrived. We opened a second, more casual bistro downtown. The Silver Lining Initiative became a respected foundation within the city's culinary scene. Our lives were a whirlwind of inventory sheets, staff meetings, and fundraising galas. The chaos became our new normal. But some things never changed. On a quiet Tuesday night, long after the last customer had gone and the staff had cleaned up and left, we found ourselves alone in the original restaurant. The dining room was dark, save for a single warm light we always left on over our favorite table by the window. Outside, the city traffic painted streaks of red and white light on the wet pavement. She was in the kitchen, and the soft clatter of a whisk against a metal bowl was a familiar, comforting sound. A few minutes later, she emerged with 2 small bowls. In them was a simple dessert, a lemon posset with a shortbread cookie, the first thing she had taught me how to properly make, all those years ago. We sat across from each other at the window table, the quiet hum of the restaurant's refrigerators the only sound. We didn't need to talk about the journey. We had lived it in every bone-weary, triumphant detail. We had seen each other at our most broken and our most resilient. I looked at her. The sharp lines of her face had been softened by time and success, but the focused intensity in her eyes was the same. She was no longer just the brilliant chef I had once admired from afar. She was my partner, my anchor, the other half of this improbable life we had built. "Remember that bowl of noodles you made me?" she asked, her voice low. "The eggs were burned." I laughed. "And the noodles were mushy." "It was terrible." "No," she said, her gaze meeting mine across the table. Her eyes were clear and steady. "It was the best meal I've ever had." She reached across the table and her hand rested over mine. It was a simple, grounding gesture. It wasn't about gratitude or debt. It was about acknowledgement. A quiet recognition of the unbreakable bond forged in a dusty apartment, tested in courtrooms and online forums, and solidified in the heat of a kitchen. We sat there in the comfortable silence, 2 women against the backdrop of the city lights, knowing that no matter what the future held, we would face it together.